Kia ora tātou everyone and welcome back. Thank you to Councillor Bowen for running such an efficient and quick meeting. It's helped us this afternoon. Just I'll break with the procedure a little bit and just announce that what we all know is Orphy Mickelard is our new councillor, which will be joining us around the council table. So that's the progress results. Friday will give us the final results, but he's ahead by a bit, so we don't think that'll change. Right, we're back into our business councillors and around recommendations to council around the approving the 2021 10-year plan supporting material, which includes the draft financial and infrastructural strategies, the updated funding and financial policies, and the consultation document for audit. We're on number 2, and we're just taking those through there line by line. So we did D, we'll just jump back to C, where we have a number of amendments that councillors want to bring up. So this is around activity levels of service and budgets, and we'll put the first one up, please. And because of time, because there's a number of these, I'm just going to limit the speaking. So it'll be 3 for and 3 against if we need to go there. And we'll try and move through these with some pace because there is quite a number. So we've got program 1949. Before I do that, there was a couple of councillors that wanted to say a few things around the whole of these. So I will jump to that first before we get into a number of these. I just want to say a few words too, because I do think some of these things are relatively academic. Councillors, as we know, the LTP process has been quite challenging. Officers have reiterated that in their report to us. It's almost as if we will be having 2 LTPs. The one that we're having a look at now, which has the full Waters and Nature Calls wastewater program in it, but we do know with certainty that there is another one coming, and that one will have the pending government's 3 Waters reform, possibly some other reforms in there as well, and that will be with us in the very near future. The only uncertain thing is what the timing is. We know that our current LTP with this full Nature Calls program is difficult. It will probably be tagged by audit, in all honesty, but we have no choice. We absolutely have no choice. And like every other TA, and I don't know if you've been looking at what other metros, other cities has been happening around the country, the rates country we're in is significantly less than some of our colleagues around the country. But we must proceed in the current, even with these uncertain timelines, with the current process, and really that is the process that does take over. But as I said, almost certainly we will be revisiting this LTP. The big issue in the next couple of years for us is our infrastructure renewals. And although the city has really good, strong assets generally, they're in good shape, there is some catch-up, which we know. A majority of that is under the ground. And I, along with, I know, a number of you, do not want to see what other cities have done north and south of us and perhaps push that or kick that can down the road for a little while. It's not going to end well. Balance is the key. We know affordability is really crucial to that. And although any rate increase I think is difficult, we do have to invest in our own infrastructure and city services. So setting artificially low rates, as I said, will lead us down a foolish path. And so councillors, I do ask that you do support this LTP in its entirety. It's important. It's a place and time for us, but almost certainly we will be coming back to this with some more understanding what the city looks like, and I believe once the government's water reforms are complete, we will be financially in a far better position. So I'll leave it at that. Really, it's around investment in our infrastructure and city services, which is the key takeout. And I'll ask if anybody else would like to speak generally before we get into the amendments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I did want to make some general comments because I think it's very easy when you get down into the weeds to start to lose sight of the whole thing. And from my perspective, it's been a really tough planning and budget process. And one thing that I think we need to be clear about is that when we first came into looking at what could be achieved over the next 10 years, we were certainly looking at a much higher rates increase than 6.9%. And it has been work done by every single elected member and staff to try and prioritise, to try and cut back on everything that we felt could reasonably be cut back on, which has got us down to the 6.9% that we're at now. And I wouldn't want people to think that this is, that this 10-year plan includes everything that every elected member would have liked to have seen in it. It certainly does not. And we've all of us, offered up sacrifices, I suppose, to try and get it to where it is. So I want to make that really clear, because I think when we get into this environment now, where we've got one elected member bringing up, I don't know how many amendments there are, any one of us could have brought up 20 or 30 amendments of things that we weren't happy that had been cut out of the plan. I certainly could. I'm sure the rest of you could. But we chose not to. And the reason is because with a plan of this size, the hours and hours and hours of work that has to go into even getting a draft together requires us to work together and achieve consensus on what's in and what's out. And that's what we've done. So I've found it extremely difficult to try and balance maintaining service levels, addressing gaps where we just haven't put enough money in to provide the level of service that we say we want to provide, to address the need to more quickly address some of our renewal of infrastructure. And again, we're probably not addressing it as quickly as we would like, but we certainly aren't delaying it like some councils have done. And then planning for growth, and that's really important. I was challenged by someone at the weekend who said to me, why aren't you rezoning more land for housing? And, I pointed out the land that we were rezoning. And I had to explain every bit of land that we rezone comes with a growth cost. It comes with infrastructure cost. And the more land we rezone, the more cost we've got in our 10-year plan for supporting that rezoning. But people are crying out for rezoned land, so we've got to do it. So to try and add in, the maintaining the service levels, addressing the gaps, increasing the renewals, planning for growth, and dealing with the consequence of a very tight budget from last year, I've found it an extremely difficult balancing act. And there really has not been any wriggle room, I don't think, at all. And then the other thing that's created an extra layer of complexity that I think it's important to talk about is that we're just dealing with significant uncertainty. We don't know where and when we'll continue to be responsible for the Three Waters assets. There's significant local government reform happening at pace, and yet somehow we have to come up with a 10-year plan that's going to, account for us having to pay for it when it seems very likely that we won't be having to pay for it. And I think it's important to remember, although this is a 10-year plan, it's really the next 3 years that we focus on, because in 3 years' time we'll be looking at it all again. So I really feel that having got it to this point, with an awful lot of work, it now should be over to the community to give us feedback, and then we have a look at what needs to be adjusting. So that's why I haven't made any amendments, and I doubt very much I'll be supporting any of these ones that are coming up, because ultimately we've got to this point through a majority and consensus view of bringing this forward as it is, and I just don't support this kind of individual nature of, well, my things didn't get through, so I'm going to bring them all back again for debate.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have got a couple of comments to make. I guess firstly, we really need to keep in mind that this is an investment LTP. That really is the theme of this LTP, that actually it's about investment. We've got an opportunity to address shortfalls in basic aspects like maintenance and renewals that will prevent future failures. This is the opportunity to avoid the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff crisis, which we are seeing in other places across New Zealand right now. When the workshops first started months and months ago, some of you may recall that the Chief Executive talked about when the very, very first, very raw cut of the LTP was presented to the ELT, and with everything that was initially wanting to be achieved, it was sitting at 23%. This has gone through hours and hours and hours of work. This has gone back countless times to staff when it's been presented to elected members in workshops and talked about our priorities, our levels of service, and we've gone back with more cuts, and we have gone from 23% at that very first cut down to 6.9%. It's really gone through the ringer. And that is one of the reasons why we have workshops, and that is one of the reasons why we don't do all of it in the chamber in one go. I absolutely think that would be a nightmare. It is really disappointing to go through this process with a number of second attempt amendments coming through, especially when we look at the track record of some elected members who do bring out lots of amendments and then vote against the long-term plan as a whole. And my concern today is that we are going to be presented with a whole range of amendments as we are going through, just to see that exact same thing take place. Some of the proposals in the long-term plan, in the draft, are also a result, worth acknowledging, a result of last year's very low rate increase, which at the time was argued to be a sensible approach as we were facing a global pandemic that we did not know what the effect on our community would be. I would like to think that if we are looking back now upon reflection, we would agree that it was probably unnecessarily low and has resulted in a higher increase in front of us today because we are playing catch-up, an additional 12 months of catch-up on top of the other investment shortfall that we're looking to address. So I'll just reiterate, this is an investment long-term plan, and I will be supporting it as it is to go out to our community for feedback.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and in my notes, I'm very much saying exactly what's already been said by Councillor Johnson and the Deputy Mayor. In my questions to the officer earlier, which caused some debate, what I was trying to do was to demonstrate that this is not it's the beginning of the end, maybe to quote Churchill. We're getting towards the end of this process, but the bulk of the work happens way before this comes into the public arena. I had a quick flick through my diary. I think we're sitting at about 50 hours of workshop time, which doesn't begin to take into account the amount of pre-reading and thinking time put in by elected members. So there's been a huge amount of work to get us to this point. The Deputy Mayor's categorising this as an investment long-term plan. The Mayor's talked about it as a prioritisation budget before. I think both of those words are accurate in this context. We've had to go through that huge, huge list of programmes and prioritise where our investment best sits. And I am comfortable with where we've got to. Not 100% satisfied. I think for most of us, we'll all say there are things we would have changed, there are things we would do differently, there's things we put in, there's things we'd take out. But we've had some very robust discussion. There's been a fair amount of horse trading, I suppose, to get us to where we are today, which is something I hope that most of us can live with. Yeah, we are dealing with underinvestment, historic and historical, in our infrastructure, in our information management, in our people. And we haven't fixed all of those things. We've done a nod in the direction of some of it. There will be more work to do. As others have said, we're dealing with significant uncertainty in the Three Waters space, which might mean this is the shortest ever long-term plan. It might be back in a year's time to do again. For me, one of the points that comes through in the papers is around the impact of the earthquake strengthening legislation, which puts $150 million on our books, where we'll see no particular benefit for that. That's required under legislation. It's do it or demolish. And that's a conversation for our community, but that's not within our control. Whether we have to do it, we do something. That sits there. Dealing with housing crisis, dealing with climate crisis. There are so many hot button issues that we're trying to address in this one. I mean, it's massive, but it could be a lot bigger if we were doing everything that we could do in this space. So I think where we're landing, there's still more work to do, no question about it. But I am comfortable with that. There are lots of things that were considered but not included. I'm open to hearing from our community as to where they think this can go from now. But for the work that's taken to get to this place, then I'm comfortable and I hope we can support this LTP.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, perhaps from recent speakers, see this a little bit different in the process. I see that all our work done in the draft in workshop settings is just some of the pre-work done until we get to this chamber to debate it publicly. I think those that have talked about transparency in the past and then just go and support this without any comment or putting up what you feel needs to change is a real disservice to our community. The phrase has been talked about saying this is a second attempt. I think that's misused. The phrase of using relitigate in this setting of a draft budget, I think also is not appropriate. This is our first opportunity and our first attempt to make changes to the draft budget for our city. Not just an annual budget, for the next 10 years. It was recently reported yesterday that the rate rise could be, what's this here reading? $1,100 within 5 years extra on somebody's rate bill. If you think that is affordable and acceptable, then you can sit in silence. But those that feel like we need to make some adjustments, now's your chance, and I'd encourage it. We have to be true to our own beliefs, actually take our responsibilities of what we're elected for, and advocate for the best outcomes for our city going forward. And so that's where my differing comes from. In the past, this long-term plan draft debate has been had a whole day set aside for the deliberations, with backup days if needed. It was unfortunate to have another committee meeting to be scheduled today to give due weight to how important this is. In my view, this is rubber hitting the road. The very reason we're elected is to flesh out the dollars and cents, the financial policies of the 10-year plan and every other plan that goes within it. I see it very clearly. I think this is the day we are putting forward the challenge of, does this program stack up? Does this policy sit well with us? And if not, raise it, debate it, and vote. And so I'm going to support that process, and I feel good about that. There's been no change. I think people are trying to rewrite the past, that this is how we do it. We just vote and just rubber stamp it. I don't think that's true. I've been around this many times, and as I said, even with questioning, even to get it to a point where the consultation document starts getting finalised with the words, so we actually know what's going to the public. We're doing so much of this blind, in my view, and with gaps in some of the presentations. It's only right for us to make wrongs right. Otherwise, if you feel like you can sleep at night with shortcutting that process, well done. But for me, I feel like I want to sleep at night knowing that we've done the right thing by our ratepayers today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. By way of general comment, I find it humorous that we've now managed to have a debate about having a debate. Look, I think we can and should acknowledge the huge amount of work that has been done in the workshops, and that there is a level now of collectivity and ownership around what has been brought out now into public for consideration. But I don't think that we should confuse that level of collectivity with anything like a strong consensus. And I think it's only too right that we do invest the time here where there are questions to consider those questions here in public. You know, sometimes things change over time, sometimes perspectives and comments might change when they're under more public scrutiny. I think, you know, some of those times in the workshops were hours and hours and hours. The reality is some of those things went by like that, and we didn't really have the chance to sit down and say, well, let's look at this. So that gives us an opportunity now to have a look at items that individual elected members may have concerns about. How the vote goes is another matter, but I do very much hold for the right of elected members to bring things up for consideration, certainly at this early stage, and would continue to hold that right through until the final edition in June. So we'll leave it there for now. Obviously have a specific amendment to speak to in future, but wanted to contribute that perspective in to the debate about the debate. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in support of Councillor Dennison, a number of things he said sort of stole my thunder, but there is one I wanted to add. A councillor was singled out as bringing amendments regularly. I'd totally support that councillor in bringing those amendments, as I believe this is the place where that councillor can be heard. This is the place where it should be brought to. Yes, we appreciate workshops. Yes, we appreciate all the hours we put in at those workshops. We appreciate everything we do. But I would call it nothing short of bullying to single out that councillor and keep bashing that councillor for what that councillor wants to bring to the table. That councillor has the right to do that, and I think we need to all take a step back and know, as it's been said, this is the place to do that debating. This is the place to have that out and to be sure so that we can all, as said, sleep comfortably at night. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the comments made already. I think the transparent democratic process has been challenged by comments made today, and I certainly make no apology for engaging very actively in this process, a process by which I believe this is the first opportunity to engage in the appropriate decision-making forum on our draft of the long-term plan. And I just want to give a few background comments. I won't speak to the amendments just yet. But certainly there's two sides of every coin, and I think the philosophy in perhaps starting at 23% and then getting it down to 16 and then getting it down to 6.9 is that perhaps some elected members believe that where we have arrived at is really good because of where we've come from. Where we started has been described recently to me as a wish list, and certainly I don't think that where we started was ever anything close to realistic for a responsible plan for our community going forward. I think Councillor Dingwall made a really important point earlier in the questioning when she said it's really hard to compare to numbers, get the financial, see where we've come to compare it to what's in front of us. And I certainly agree with her on those points. And I took the exercise over the last couple of days to actually pull out the 18 to 28 long-term plan and actually do some of that comparison. And I think that helped me give me quite a different perspective than perhaps the one that's been described in terms of coming down and from the 23%. And I just want to quickly make a few points on that. Both from the capital expenditure program and for the operational program. Looking at our last long-term plan, our overall capital expenditure program was 765 million, which is around half of what is proposed in this long-term plan, being 1.489 million. Even when you take out the wastewater and the numbers that were in the wastewater in the last long-term plan, we've more than doubled the new capital in terms of our expenditure. So we've gone from what was 507 capital new to 1.1 capital new expenditure. So even when you take wastewater out, we've more than doubled the non-wastewater expenditure. So I guess that in itself led me to really question why wastewater was being blamed for what is also being described as an unsustainable budget, and one which local government funding agency would not fund and does not meet the limitations that are set by local government funding agency. If we go back and look at the numbers, and even taking out wastewater, it's still an incredibly excessive budget, and one that I think needs some hard decisions made. Individuals, families and businesses, when they cannot afford the budget that's in front of them, have to cut that back and they have to make hard decisions. And I believe that is something we should be doing as a council, because we need to provide a draft plan to our community that we endorse and that we think is responsible. I don't believe that the draft in front of us is responsible, and I don't think it's prudent, and I do think there's changes that can be made. We've heard people say that we've got no choice. I don't believe that. I think we do have choice. We've got about $100 million worth of capital new choice that isn't even the wastewater program. So that's the basis on which I have looked through the document, and I certainly have not brought every single item here that I would have liked to have debated if we'd had more time. There were hundreds of items debated in workshops. I think I've brought about 17. Those are not ones that I'm trying to add in. Those are ones that I think add up to about 85 million worth of reductions from what's in the plan. Even if we adopted all of those, that wouldn't be enough. But I'm just saying, as an elected member, that's a I'd like to make that my attempt to at least pull it back a little bit. And if we all did that, then perhaps we would arrive at a plan that was a little bit more affordable to our community and a little bit more responsible and might meet the limits set by the local government funding agency. The Mayor suggested that it's almost certain that we'll be revisiting this long-term plan anyway, post-audit. I think why wait for an audit to tell us it's not sustainable, it's not acceptable? Well, surely we should be doing that work now to get it as good as we can, or as affordable as we can. And I think the limits that are set to us are the maximum limits. They're not, we've also got to think about what can our community afford. 23% rates increase over the next 3 years, I don't think many in our community can afford. So I think there's a number of reasons why we actually do need to make some hard decisions. There's a number of items that I have outlined to seek amendments today, and certainly I've got nothing negative to say about any of those. If we had an unlimited bucket of money, I would support every single one of them. They all have merit, and they all would provide value to our community if included. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you why they're a waste of time or not worthy of consideration. Why I've put them in front of us to consider today is because I think they're unaffordable, and we have a responsibility to live within our means and to find an appropriate and affordable budget. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, councillors. Right, okay, we'll get into things. So we have the amendments there. So the first one's around program 1949, Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. At the moment, it has a 250,000 operation budget. The amendment is to change that to 125 and to look at the library and Te Manawa options only. That's from you, Councillor Naylor. Would you like to speak any further to that?
Yes, I would, thanks. So the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan has already had a significant, a draft master plan, I should say, already had a significant amount of investment. I think an officer said it was over $100,000 to put together that draft plan that we considered a couple of years ago. When Council considered that plan, it did not approve that plan, but sought community consultation prior to progressing that plan. So it's been quite a big surprise to me to see budgets included that are quite large budgets to develop that plan further prior to consultation, and the rationale has been given by officers that that's needed and to be able to consult the community. I believe 250,000 is too much just to get another draft plan to consult the community on. The rationale for needing the work around the library in Te Manawa I do think is valid though, and so that's why I have proposed a reduction to still achieve some work around looking at what can be done for the library in Te Manawa.
Okay, are there anybody else wishing to speak for that? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In questions, I just clarified whether there was a capital budget for after this operational budget in year one was utilised. There is no provision, not $1, in our long-term plan to do any of the work. There is work to do the strengthening of Te Manawa and the library, but that is set aside different. It's no specific plan for the Civic and Cultural Precinct. This had its origins back looking through the work schedule of the Planning and Policy Committee from the 1st of April 2019. We've had expected reports back in April last year, which got bounced through to August, followed through a councillor workshop briefing on the 19th of August, and therefore on the work schedule it now reads that we expect the report in June 21. That's unfortunate that we haven't had something more before now come to us to consider as part of the long-term plan. With the pressures of also moving forward a suggestion of the Arena South stand of the 12 million up into year 3, 4 and 5, I also think it's very unlikely that we're going to be finding any money to do the Civic and Cultural Precinct in the first part of the long-term plan. And so therefore I think the work to do this investigation and inquiry work is quite limiting for my mind to do it. And so one way of balancing the moderating of our budget is by halving it, and I'm happy to support it as a seconder. Thank you.
Right, anybody else wishing to speak for this? Okay. Right, okay. Councillor Beattie, you're obviously speaking against.
I'd just like to make a comment that if you reduce this budget from 250 to 125, you're actually not just halving the budget, you are actually changing the scope. And it would be very short-sighted not to look at that whole area of the CBD with the Civic and Cultural Precinct in line with the library and Te Manawa, because there could be options or third-party funding and you will lose any opportunities that you have of having a better precinct, a whole precinct or not. So I think it would be very short-sighted.
Yeah, I also echo your comments, Councillor Beattie. I think we either do this or we don't do it. I don't think you can just chop it in half. One thing that's been missed here is the external investment which these plans ultimately are there for. They consult to our public. We ask for what it may look like, but actually it's not council doing all this work. We're not going to develop the whole precinct. It's actually going to be vast majority will be external. So to attract that investment, you need a elevator pitch, you need a plan, you need a master plan. So it will attract accommodation, it will attract inner city living, it will attract possibly a cultural centre, it will attract a new or possible new home for what may be a tamanua or where the library may end up. So I think we've got to be mindful of the holistic, the bigger picture here. I get that it's a costly exercise. Those that have been through any sort of master planning will understand that it is expensive work and it needs some experts. So we either chop this totally. I don't think you can start changing the scope and doing it by halves. So unfortunately, I won't be supporting the amendment. Any other councillors that wish to speak? Councillor Bowen, you were there.
Well, I think you just said it all, Mr. Mayor. All I was going to say is it's a master planning exercise. It is investigation and inquiry. It's nothing else. It's a master plan that actually we had a draft. Elected members wanted to put it out for consultation. In order to do that, we have to do something a bit more than we had before. So really, this is just what elected members asked for. So we can't really be surprised that it's turned up again. So I won't support cutting it at this stage.
All right, I'll go back to you for right of reply, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just briefly, the suggestion was made that we should be looking at the whole area. The whole area has been looked at in the draft master plan already, and I think that work doesn't have to be repeated. The concepts of external funding are a good way of getting things into the LTP, and saying that the vast majority will be external is a good way of getting it into the LTP, but all of a sudden the vast majority, or 90%, becomes 70%, which becomes 50%, and the rest of the budget blows out, and all of a sudden council's funding something by the tune of $40 or $50 million, I don't know, or more. So I do think that we need to just have a little bit of restraint about how many big pieces of work that we take on. The other piece of really valuable information that was presented to us in workshops by one of the general managers was that every $1 million of capital expenditure costs us $6 million in operational to support that over the life of that asset. And so we just need to think about that with the number of new stuff that we choose to build.
All right, thank you. Councillors, I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has failed. 4 votes for and 9 against. Right, we go to the next amendment, which is program 1. Oh, okay, we've missed one there. Okay. Right, okay, thank you. So we go to program 902, which is around property seismic strengthening. Currently 115 million. The amendment is to change that to 60 million through a reprioritisation. Councillor Naylor.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, sorry. A point of order. Are we sticking to speaking times?
Yes.
So it's 5 minutes for the proposer, and how much for everyone else?
It's 5 each.
And then right of reply?
There's no time in our standing orders.
Oh, okay. Right, thank you.
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, did we jump one, or are we just going back to that one after?
We're doing them in...
There was one on
alphabetical order.
Closing level of service gaps for reserves. Are we doing that after? Okay, thank you. The seismic strengthening one is a big one, 115 million. In the budget, the majority of that actually fall in the middle years. There is some smaller amounts in year 1 and 2 and 3, but the bigger amounts are in the middle, year 4, 5, 6. At the moment, I think it would be good if we could do that, but ultimately I don't think we can afford it. However, that is something that we could revisit at the next LTP if our position was any different. So for this LTP, I'm suggesting that we reduce the amount that we plan to spend for that, because that is, as someone's already pointed out, there is still the option not to do earthquake strengthening on a building. So I'm suggesting, so this one and the rest of this next section are all about reducing what's proposed, and this I'm suggesting to leave about 60 million in there.
Just before there are some speakers, did our property manager want to make a comment about legislation?
So essentially we do have a 15-year deadline. We do have 9 buildings to do. If we were to try and reprioritise things, so I guess currently those 9 buildings have gone through quite a rigorous sort of process to prioritise them. It's looked at things like readiness, complexity, operational functionality, and things along those lines. Hence, sort of the order it's been calculated in. To try and reprioritise those and to reach a figure of 60 million, you are essentially moving 60% of the $160 million, because it is a 15-year program, into a 5-year period just past this, and you would. That would be the most complex buildings as well. So the regents, the libraries, the te manuas, we would be essentially in the space of 5 years doing some very heavy lifting, for lack of a better way of putting it, in a very short amount of time. And I think that's possibly something to consider in your deliberations.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask the officer a question?
Yes.
Can I just ask, if a business was in the same position and couldn't afford that, what would they do? Or what would the options for them? What would be the options?
It's a very good question, and it's one that the industry is asking at the moment, and primarily of central government. Currently, legislation, they have 2 options. They can either strengthen it, abandon it, I guess, or demolition, really. So 3 options. This is going to be a bit of a problem, especially all around New Zealand, but in Palmerston North as well, for a lot of private people. And exactly what would happen in 15 years, I couldn't speculate. If we've got 100 odd buildings or something like that in Palmerston North, what would that mean? I don't know.
Okay. Now, who would like to speak for this? Okay. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mentioned the issue of seismic strengthening in my general comments. It is a particular concern to me, and one I think that our community shares, and I cannot support this proposal in front of us. It's a very definition of kicking the can down the road. We have 15 years to do this work. Do it or demolish. We're talking about the Regent. We're talking about Te Manawau. We're talking about the library. I don't think demolishing those buildings is what the member is suggesting at all, but those are the options that we have under the legislation. We have to plan to do this work. It's legislatively driven. We have 15 years. We're into that 15 years already. We don't actually have 15 years anymore. So it would be negligent not to plan for that whole programme of work. It would be kicking the can down the road to future councils who would have an even shorter time frame with an inflation-adjusted figure, which will not look any prettier than it looks today. So I get that this is not particularly pleasant, but we're not here to do only the nice things, so I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo the comments that has been made by Councillor Bowen. We don't have time to mess around with this one. I was quite surprised to see the very, very sharp jump from this plan and our previous long-term plan, but actually we don't have much choice at all. It needs to happen or they'll demolish it. And I do know actually that some business owners are just waiting. They're just waiting for their time to run out, and then they plan on abandoning those buildings. We don't want to set that example, actually. We want to do what we need to do under legislation to look after these buildings, and God forbid we actually had an earthquake and something actually happened and people actually died, and we were the ones who decided to hold this as long as humanly possible. I cannot support this one.
Right, no more speakers. I'll go back to you, Councillor Naylor. Okay, thank you. All right, councillors, we'll put this to the vote, please. And that has lost 2 votes for and 11 against. Right, we'll go to the next one, which is program 1852, closing the level of service gaps for reserves, currently at 661,000. We're changing that increase to 330,000, half. Councillor Naylor, to you.
The next 7 proposed amendments are all quite similar in their nature, in that what it's proposing is to increase the budget, but only by half as much as what's proposed. So there are budgets for all of these things within the MSL, the maintaining service level budgets. The programs themselves are what is additional to that, so what is being increased over the next 10 years. And I guess what my suggestion is on this is that we can't, all of these things have merit, and it would be great to be able to give the invest to the level that's proposed in the plan, but I don't believe we can afford to increase at the rate and at the level that's proposed. So this is taking smaller increases rather than larger increases. So the, yeah, I think that hopefully explains it well enough.
Right, are there any others that wish to speak for this? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
I don't support this, and I think what we need to be very careful about is something that happened last year when there was a big push to try and keep rates down, and lots of operational money was cut, and the consequences have weighed heavily on staff as well as on services. And where it says closing level of service gaps for reserves, what that's about is where we say we're doing something, but we don't actually put the budget in to deliver it. And when that happens, either the public doesn't get the level of service that we've led them to believe they're getting, or staff are bending over backwards and working, you know, either more or under a lot more pressure than they should be to try and deliver that level of service. So a line on a piece of paper looks quite good. Oh, yes, we can save 330,000. But the reality on the ground is we're either not delivering what we say we're going to deliver, or we're putting our staff under increased pressure. And at one stage last year, I think, well, this year, this financial year, but towards the end of last calendar year, I think we were carrying 90 vacancies or something ridiculous, because staff couldn't be replaced because we, as council, hadn't put enough money on the table to enable the level of service that we said we were delivering to be delivered. So I'm absolutely not supporting this kind of a thing. It's short-sighted. It's the sort of thing that sounds great when you see it written down, oh, yeah, it's a saving. But the reality is we're either shortchanging our ratepayers by not delivering what we say we're going to deliver, or we're shortchanging our staff by making them do stuff for less budget than can possibly be done. So no way am I supporting this.
Councillor Harpeter.
Just to keep it short and sweet, I definitely aren't supporting this, but this is where we'll get the complaints because the lawns aren't cut, the rubbish isn't picked up, and all of the things that are really basic and very obvious aren't done for our communities. And we'll get all the complaints, so there's no way I'll be supporting this. Sorry about that.
Okay, nobody else is in the queue. I'll go back to you, Councillor Naylor, right a reply. Okay, thank you. All right, we will vote on this amendment. That is lost, 2 votes for and 11 against. We'll get the next one up, which is program 1941, which is around removing library fines. At present, that would be a $368,000 cost. The amendment is to change that to 184 by halving the fines. Councillor Naylor.
So this one would be suggesting a change to the status quo. Currently, library fines are a mechanism to ensure that books and other things from the library actually get returned to the library. I think that is probably a fairly effective mechanism, so I'm actually hesitant to adopt that in its entirety anyway, aside from the fact that it would cost the ratepayers an additional $368,000 over the next 10 years to do that. So I'm suggesting halving the fines. I think there was some good rationale when I think we might have had the discussion about the fact that elected members would not want people in our community to not be able to borrow from the library because they had racked up fines. So I guess I'm suggesting that halving it hopefully would minimise that risk, but at the same time still retain the mechanism for items to be returned. So I think this is a win-win.
All right, are there any councillors that support this? Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to support this one simply because I know that for a lot of vulnerable communities, particularly vulnerable families, particularly vulnerable children, they actually struggle once they end up getting fines. They don't actually come back to the library. They just stop coming to the library at all. And I know this because I have been in that position where my own children racked up fines at the library many, many years ago, and we felt that we couldn't come back into the library until we'd sorted that out. So I think that it's important that we try and have systems that encourage our young people to use our library services, particularly when, like, the library is one of the few places that you can go and sit and spend time in without actually spending money. So I think, you know, it's an issue where when we have children, especially children who are transient, who are having to move from house to house to house because they don't have stable accommodation and things like that, I think this is a way of supporting that community. So I don't want to support that. I would rather just remove the fines.
Councillor Johnson.
I don't support this. I also want to clarify that what we're actually talking about is $42,000 a year over the 10 years. And it's for removing library fines for youth and children. It's not for everybody. And what I support is universal access to facilities as a principle. And library fines do act as a disincentive for people to use the facility. And what we're talking about is children who generally don't have any of their own income. So children in a position not to use the library because their parents can't afford to pay the library fines, I think is very inequitable. There are very few new programs being suggested in the community space, very few in this 10-year plan. This is one of them, and I support it because it improves access for everybody, including our most vulnerable children.
Okay, nobody else in the queue. Back to you, Councillor Naylor, you're fine. Okay, we will vote, please. And that has failed. 2 votes for, 11 against. We now come to programs 1564 and 1565 around community development, arts and environmental grant increases of $924,000, and the amendment is to change that increase to half at $462,000. Councillor Naylor.
Community groups, arts groups, and environment groups in our community do an amazing job and deserve our support. And I support increasing their funding over this long-term plan, but am suggesting increasing their funding at a slightly slower rate, just for the purposes of trying to make the plan a little bit more sustainable.
Right, anybody else like to speak in favour of this amendment? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
So again, to clarify, these aren't actually increases that are being introduced in this 10-year plan. These were increases that Councillor Bowen and myself introduced in the last 10-year plan. So they've been in place for the last 3 years. And if we were to cut them in half, what would we be actually delivering to our community sector, our arts sector and our environment sector is a cut. What we're talking about is $84,000 in year one. And I'm not prepared to support that. Warm words about how much we value their contribution, I can assure you, will mean absolutely nothing to them if we reduce the amount of funding that we supply.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was particularly disappointed to see this brought forward. I think if we went line by line through the whole budget and tried to find where is the most valuable, and perhaps it feels like we are going line by line through the whole budget to try to find where the most value is. But in honesty, it is this point where we actually spend a very small amount of money, and it gets hugely amplified through volunteer effort that has built up over time to hold these sectors together, to knit our community together. I'm just shocked that we would even consider this. So I have not been wanting to comment most of the way through, but the level of disappointment here is sufficient that I did feel I needed to contribute, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I won't be supporting this, and I just refer elected members back to comments made in Arts, Culture and Heritage this afternoon, where when asked about a reduction in funding that Square Edge had to deal with, they talked about how it means that they're out there searching for funding from other places, which means they can't do the things that we want them to do because they're spending all of their time and effort trying to replace that funding. So we actually do our voluntary sector a huge disservice, way beyond the dollar value we attribute to that grant if we reduce that funding.
Okay, no further speakers there, so back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask for clarity from the officers about this, because this program, as I had understood it, as described in the consultation document and in the budget, I thought was over and above the existing budgets, and what's been suggested is quite different to that, so it would be good to have some clarity if anyone's able to provide that. I certainly wouldn't support it either if it was actually a cut, but that wasn't my understanding.
Okay, I'll just...
From my understanding, the description of them is the increased amount from the 2018 to 28 budgets. We're just double checking in a moment. Make sure we're getting the right answer.
Sorry, was that an increase from what we currently fund those groups or not? Oh, okay.
I can assure you it is not an increase.
Same amount as what we've got in the current year, so Councillor Johnson's interpretation is the correct one.
Okay, on that basis, I'm happy to withdraw that amendment. It wasn't my understanding, so... Okay.
All right, the second is nodding his head, so we don't have to vote on this. Thank you. All right, we'll move to the next one. Three of these go together in tandem. So we've got Program 1929, which is Workforce Transformation. Currently has a budget of 1.876 million, operational over 8 years, and the amendment is to change that to half, to 938,000. Going with that, in tandem, is Program 86 is around furniture replacements, which is capital renewal, $841,000, changing that in half to $420,000. Program 2047, furniture transformation, that's capital new, of $1.126 million. The amendment is to change that to in half at $563,000. And then finally, program 1826, which is the civic administration building, the workplace transformation. That's a capital new program of $2.968 million, and that is around changing that in half to $1.484 million. We'll be voting on all four together. Councillor Naylor.
I had asked a question during question time around what our maintaining service levels budget was and what the percentage increase was, and I'm just wondering if there was an answer to that, because that really was, I was hoping that that might provide some context to this, because I'm assuming or understanding that these are on top of whatever the increases that are already included in that MSL increase. Can I find that out?
Steve?
Just looking to see if I can get that information back in front of me again. I had it here before. 1 second. Broadly, my recollection from the notes I've written myself, which I'm just waiting for this thing to come back to life, is that when we looked at we could describe the rates increase in a number of ways in terms of the first year, and we've said that roughly 3/4 of the increase of the 6.9%, representing 5.3% out of 6.9, relates to the increased renewals. What we also have said is that in terms of the changes to this year's budget, some of that cost is offset by increased revenue assumptions that we reinstated things to do with COVID. So there was about 1.4% saving, if you like, because of the reintroduction of net revenue from the COVID adjustment from the current year. We also said that there was about 1.6% net of increased costs across the whole organisation that covered such things as salary and wages and all of the net other cost increases that the council was operating to run the place. So that basic MSL, if you like, we were trying to describe to you as if you were trying to compare like with like, was effectively about 1.6% in terms of the impact on rates. So that, I guess, is the best I can do in terms of answering your question about what the MSL increase is.
Thank you, that's helpful. Can I quickly ask what the other remaining 1.4% is?
That is really, some of it is to do with the increased operating programs that we've got, that increase in the level of those, and there's some adjustments the other way in terms of the financing costs.
Yep. Thank you, that's helpful.
Okay, so you're going to speak to this?
Yeah, I guess that confirms my understanding that the maintaining service levels, the base budgets do have incremental increases, and so my understanding that these programs are over and above that. So once again, we have heard, in terms of the HR picture, we have had some really good information provided in the workshops also about the need for that to increase, and it certainly has increased significantly over the last 3 years, and there obviously is plans for that to increase. I guess that the rate at which that is increasing is a little bit of a concern to me, not when I say a concern to me in terms of the financial impact of that, the lack of affordability of that in terms of the rate that's being suggested. So these 4 programs are all ones that I think have merit once again, but providing those increases at a slower rate, I think, is a more prudent approach.
Okay, is there anybody in support of this that wishes to speak? Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, just briefly, as I did second these, wanted to identify the reason why. I think this is certainly an area of travel that I support, but it's one where I'd be prepared to see the pace moderated some. Half is a little bit of an arbitrary number, I do acknowledge, but I'm happy to support a change of pace in this one case. Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody else wish to speak in favour of this? No? Okay, we'll go to the noes. Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I totally go against this. I think the workforce transformation is a project that's on track, and I think if we derail it, I think it would be a disaster for the organisation. I think we should just let it go on track and fully support what the CE is doing, and I think we should just carry on going the way we are going and support what she has started down the track on this, and don't think by doing this, I don't think it's a really good way of doing it, so I think we should carry on going down the track with the full support that we've given her to date.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I won't be supporting these. I mean, there is a Māori proverb that he tangata, it's about the people, and our greatest asset is our people, and we've got to try and support them. We've seen the issues that we've had in the last year, because of we did chop some budgets, and we're playing a bit of catch up here. I know these are challenging numbers, but remember they are over 8 to 10 years, and really, if you want to have an engaged workforce, one, you've got to pay them properly. 2, you've got to actually put them in something, and 3, you've got to let them be able to work from something. So I think this is sound. We've heard from the officers the reasons why these numbers are what they are, so I'm quite happy to take the lead on that, remembering this is over 10 years. Councillor Johnson.
I won't be supporting this, and I really disagree with taking an approach that we can chop back on provision for staff. Our people in this organisation are our most important asset, and we have heard repeatedly in the workshops that we've had about the underinvestment in HR that's occurred in this organisation over many, many years. And it's a kind of I think maybe some elected members see this as a bit of an easy target, you know, any kind of internal money, any sort of money spent on our staff or furniture replacements or whatever, CAB work, oh, well, that's a kind of an easy target. I don't think it's an easy target. We're already, as it is, struggling to retain staff. Our salaries are not competitive. If our workplace environment becomes unpleasant as well, how actually are we going to persuade people to come and work for us? So I really do think that this kind of attempt to sort of shortchange the staff is a bit despicable, quite honestly.
All right, we've had 3 against. Councillor Dennison, you're in the queue. Are you for?
My only request was that the first program be split and taken separately, and the reason for that is I can support, I'll oppose the workforce transformation, which I'd imagine is more towards personnel, but I'm happy to support the cut in half to the furniture replacement. I'm kind of have some alignment to.
We'll do that.
Thanks.
One moment, caller. We'll just get that sorted. Okay, so we've got the first one up there, program 1929, around the workplace transformation. So back to you as a right to reply on everything, Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. I do just want to make a couple of comments. It's been suggested that operational money was cut in last year's budget, and I just want to remind councillors that we did increase our expenditure from 98 million to 101 million last year. So there weren't cuts, there were just smaller increases than what had been previously planned. So we think we just need to be careful about our terminology when we talk about some of the budget changes that have happened. The second point I want to make is I absolutely value the staff in this organisation. I think they work incredibly hard. I think I've actually asked some quite specific questions over the years to understand, because normally in big organisations, the staff wage and salary budgets are quite clear how much they are and how much they go up. that's a little bit harder to identify through the way our budgets are outlined. But last year it was clarified what the total salary and wage budget was at that time, and I understand the increase that's applied through the budgets from the information that was given to us during the workshops, and that looks to me like it's around an 8% increase, so for increases and for additional staff. So from my perspective, I think that is plenty to be able to attract staff and support the staff that are currently there. So, I mean, that's why, on that basis, I'm comfortable to proceed with limiting the increase in this way.
Okay, we will vote, please. That has failed. 2 votes for and 11 against. Right, we have the other 3 programs here. I'm not going to read them again. It's just that it's around furniture replacements, furniture transformation, and the CAB, workplace transformation. So we've had the right of reply, so we will vote in tandem on these, please.
Mr. Mayor, can I make one further point on that final one?
No,
Oh,
I signalled that we were going to do that. So can you vote, please? That has failed. 5 votes for and 8 against. Right. Oh, this is my one. Okay. All right, this is number 6. This is that dependent on 66% of the funding being raised externally, the program for the Central Energy Trust Arena, the Southern Grandstand, program number 990, be funded in year 3. And I'm taking on board comments made earlier here. 100,000 around costings QS process. Year 4. 600,000 around the design, planning, consenting, and then the construction phase of year 5, and year 6 being 7 mil, and then 4.4 million. And that's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Harper. If I could just speak to that very briefly, just to say, look, this is in the Arena Master Plan. That's something that we endorsed originally. It was part of the past LTP. There has been some mistakes in some of the numbers, which the officers have deemed to correct. I'm seeking your support to bring forward the construction really from year 7 to year 5. And the reasons for that, there is some momentum in the overall master plan, and you will see that in the coming months when the first bigger stage of Arena is opened on time and on budget. The second part of it is we are in a period now where it's reliant on external money, and if we don't keep the momentum going there, it will falter. So it's either a do this or we don't do it. So I'm just seeking your support really to bring it a couple of years ahead. It is reliant on 66% of the funding, and that's how we have worked with some of these community projects where a third is council, a third is around the community saying they're going to do this or want this, trust funding, etc., and in this case, some central government funding. So, anybody else wish to speak in favour? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to happily support this. Being on the Arena steering group, there is a interest for the developments to continue on and complete the overall master plan. The first stage, we've done the all-weather surfaces out in the back fields, which is having more use than what was first predicted. We've got the upgrade to Arena 2 as partly insurance, but also with the retractable seating, which has been a fantastic state-of-the-art leader in the country. And now the current work with the entranceway plaza, pits and bridge access is looking pretty stunning. And with the teams champs, I got to experience the benefit of the pits and the and the atmosphere of that south stand, which is temporary in place there with the embankment. What this will bring is more capacity, and it would also bring more functionality and more profile. As more and more people start to use the arena, the level of service that people will expect and want to enjoy is also increasing. And so this is just keeping up. This is actually quite a small investment for a second stand. Others are spending much larger figures, and so I'm very comfortable in supporting this. And I think you'll find through the submission process there'll be a lot of public submissions in favour. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Now that we've got the 100,000 QS process in there, I'm comfortable to support this. This won't come up again for the next three years, so this gives us plenty of time. It follows on from what Councillor Dennison said. We can follow on the momentum of what we're doing there. It gives us a couple of years gap, and by the time we get to this costing process, we will know what sort of funding's out there. We will be closer to the, we'll have nature calls, the government will. So I just think, for me, this is just a holding budget, so there's no risk for us bringing this forward.
Okay, councillors wishing to speak against. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. The arena program in the last LTP was spread out over quite a few years, and in the last few years some of the outer years were pulled earlier to achieve what's being developed at the moment, and so I certainly don't support bringing this earlier as well. Once again, this is something that was meant to be 90% funded, and suddenly it's 66, and then who knows what it might be in the future once we've already spent a lot of money on it. I mean, to me, this is just lacking restraint in a budget that's already unsustainable and unaffordable, so I certainly won't be supporting it.
I wasn't going to speak, but I will, sorry, as a right of reply. It was never going to be 90% funded. As I said, the council officers made some errors there, so it was always going to have a level of third funding from council. You just need to look at what has happened around our country at the moment. Gisborne District Council, 40 million for their new grandstand. As Councillor Dennison said, this is relatively modest compared to other facilities. Hundreds of millions being spent at the Metro sports facility in Christchurch. So, councillors, we either do this or we don't do it. So I just ask for your support. It will give us an impetus to talk to government. As Councillor Beattie said, there's a process in it. It does give our funding people time to source that external funding, which is significant still, and it won't be easy, and it will take some years. So it just puts everything into a holding pattern, but also continues the momentum, the good momentum that's going at Arena. So I ask for your support, please. We will vote. It's passed 10 votes for and 3 against. Right, we go to number 7, where the council ring fences PNCC's Turitea wind farm revenue for use on specific biodiversity projects within the draft LTP. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a story that's obviously quite a few years in the making, so I'll try to get to the point of it reasonably quick. To me, the fundamental question here is whether we, as a council, can remain true to the undertakings that were made to the community in the first instance, and in particular how they relate to commercial revenue off of reserves. And I think there is actually an opportunity here to get it right, which is why I've wanted to raise this here. I think that supporting this amendment will bring us closer to actually delivering on those outcomes that were signaled to the community in the early 2000s. And to reflect back to that time, there were 2 substantial engagements with the community, one around the purpose of the reserve and a change in purpose to include renewable energy generation, and the second was the actual project proposals. And in both of those, there was the sort of, I guess the offering to the community, the sort of offset, as it were, almost, was to say, yes, allow us to start a industrial scale wind farm in a nature reserve, and in return for that, you'll get some revenue that can be used to support biodiversity in that reserve. I think, you know, where we are today, it's unrealistic to think, given the budget that we're facing, that we should try to invest it back in that reserve. But I think that keeping the scope around biodiversity is something that's doable and that we should consider. Obviously, part of this hinges on whether or not we can ring fence, and I think we established earlier today that, you know, often we do ring fence, and in fact this revenue is already ring fenced at the reserves level due to the Reserves Act, and I'm just suggesting that with the activity that we have at Wild-Based Recovery, Green Corridors, the Turitea Reserve itself, the Manawatu River Park, Arapuki, Ashurst Domain, et cetera, there is actually quite a scope of biodiversity-related work, especially if we get to the point where we acknowledge that biodiversity is not just killing rats and stoats, but actually biodiversity is community education, outreach, and activity such as we deliver through Wild-Based. So I think that actually we could have, let's say, an inclusive or a broad view of what biodiversity activity is that would actually allow this very easily to map revenue across two projects in a way that is much more consistent with the original undertakings with the community and better reflects that conversation. I think fundamentally then this is just really about us as council being able to hold trust with the community over time. This has happened over now 15 or more years, and showing that even in those long-term projects we can actually stay the course. So this amendment would not be having an impact on rates or an impact on revenue. It is simply about mapping that revenue across two specific projects and doing that in a way that builds trust with our community. I'm conscious that we're having other conversations about reserves that will probably be quite long-term conversations. For instance, at Huia Street, I think it would behoove us to actually demonstrate as a council that when we set out a strategic direction, when we set out an undertaking with the community to have a trade-off or to have a benefit back to the community, that we do our best to deliver on that. So I'd ask that you support it.
All right. Is there anybody else wanting to speak in support? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Barrett has outlined my involvement with it was that there was a real emphasis on the Turitea consenting process for an eco park up in the Turitea, and had a number of different elements to it, but much wider than that, the biodiversity in general. And so I think what he's doing is quite true. I'm happy to support it for that integrity of the process, but I have heard that there's potentially more money or out of the wind farm coming that will generate than what the current biodiversity projects are currently, but that is a further conversation for us to maybe have. But for the draft, I'm happy to support this recommendation. Thank you.
All right, anybody else wishing to speak in support? Okay, Councillor Beattie. Okay. Councillor Harper.
I'm opposing, is that? Okay. Currently we spend $273,000 per annum on biodiversity. That's what's in the 10-year plan. So we do put money towards it. That's on page 568. So we do put a good chunk of money towards biodiversity, and which is good for the council. I do think that this revenue should go towards reserves in general rather than putting it specifically towards biodiversity projects. I don't think we should be just earmarking it towards biodiversity, because we are already spending money in this area, and we're doing it as a good project already. So that's why I'm opposing it. I just don't think we should be earmarking it. I think you know, if we're going to get 500 or we're going to get 800,000. I just think whatever we get is a windfall for all of the reserves across the whole city, and I just don't think that we should be tagging it towards one area. We should be looking towards the reserves across the whole city.
I'll just speak as well. Although I have some sympathy with what the council is trying to do here, I think we're probably just jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think that as council we should keep our options open. I was actually at, and Brent probably can't remember, but this is on my back doorstep, so I went to one of these meetings and it was reserve, reserve, reserve that was spoken, rather than jumping into biodiversity specifically. I have no problems with this, where this is heading, except we've just got to keep our options open a little bit. And I'd be quite happy to have this motion on the table once we knew a little bit more about what we're doing. I just think this will ring fence us quite tightly, and we'll have to repeal this if things change, and it could be quite challenging. So I don't disagree with the intent of it, it's just jumping a little bit early for me.
Can I just provide a point of clarification? Yes. This money is actually operating revenue. It's not capital, so it can't be spent on capital. It can be spent on operating. At the moment, we do not have that many. You know, we don't have enough. If more money comes in to actually, we would have more money coming in than we have biodiversity projects, which would mean we would need to increase the number, which is an increase that hasn't been debated here in terms of projects.
Okay, so any other councillors? Councillor Johnson.
I think the CE's just really answered my question, which was around how well it matched. But am I correct in my understanding that we are already obligated to use that money for reserves anyway without a motion? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor, you've jumped in and out a couple of times, you're back out again. All right, I'll go to back to Councillor Barrett, right of reply.
Thank you. I'll accept your guidance on process here, but I have a comment and a proposal. I think we need to take a little bit of care around the 275 that's in the budget as it sits, because that's quite a narrow definition of biodiversity, and what I've proposed here is that we should actually think about a broader definition of biodiversity that would actually allow us to map out two other projects. And the reason that I've put it that way is I think it's the best way forward to, again, to keep the integrity of the process, hold trust with the community around this project, how it's unfolded. I do hear what the mayor is saying around a concern around where this might land us and perhaps jumping, and so what I would like to propose is that we amend to say that the chief executive reports to council on options for ring fencing, so that we actually can understand what is possible here and what the implications of that might be as a way forward.
I mean, just a comment. I mean, I suspect that report back is going to provide similar advice to which has already been tabled today. One thing you may want to consider is looking at changing the amendment to say, for use on specific biodiversity projects on council reserves within the draft LTP as a first priority. So what that would mean is that any revenue from the wind farm is spent on a biodiversity project in the LTP on a council reserve as a first priority. Then beyond that, any money we would have to make a decision about. At the moment, that money is then allocated to general local reserves projects. So that's a possible way around it.
The way we've treated it at the moment is general revenue just funding reserves per se. And so that's funding the day-to-day operations of parks and reserves. And that's consistent with the purposes of the Reserved Act, and that's what the requirement is in terms of the legislation, specifically about the use of money from the reserves. So that's the way we've treated it at the moment. The problem becomes, from my perspective, if we're talking about projects per se, what's a project? We in our plans talk about programs where we've got a specific program of work that we identify sometimes in here. We've got operating programs, capital programs, renewal programs, etc. We've got day-to-day miscellaneous operations of the place on reserves. So we need to be really clear about what it is that we're looking to say here. At the moment, as I said, what we've got is the assumption that it will fund the day-to-day operations of reserves, which includes some one-off operating programs on reserves, but it must be on reserves within the control of the council in terms of the legislation. So I think in terms of what the Mayor said, I think we do need to be taking care that we don't paint ourselves into a corner with it at the moment.
All right. In terms of process, it's up to the chair. I'm going to test the motion, the amendment as it stands at the moment, and it's up to councillors later on if they want to come back with something else. But it's too messy to be changing it halfway through. So, is there anything else you wish to add?
I was going to propose that we actually lie it on the table until it comes back from audit so that we can actually work through these options.
That's another way of, we'll just test the vote. We'll go from there. All right. Okay, we will vote on this. And that's failed, 3 votes for and 10 against. Right. This is that 100,000 of program 1959, the Enviro Hub and Resource Recovery Centre, subject to external funding, be brought forward from year 4 to year 3 to enable feasibility and early design to inform the next long-term plan. Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the reason why I'm bringing this one to everyone's attention is because I only just realised myself that we're currently budgeting 819K in years 4 and 5 to build an Enviro Hub, and that was, part of the questions that I was asking officers earlier. But I feel like we can't actually do that if we don't have some sort of feasibility in the years prior to work out how much we actually need in the next long-term plan. I guess that's basically what I want is to look at how much an Enviro Hub would end up costing us, because to me, the amount of money that we spent on Hancock House was not 800K. And so, if the cost of buying a house these days is approaching 800K, what are we actually paying for there? So it'd be great if we could have some information in that year 3, so that the next time we go through this process, we can actually see what it is that we're funding.
Councillor, could I just confirm, so that year 4 then becomes the program of whatever it was, 890,000 becomes 790,000 in year 4. Is that right?
So I guess what I'm suggesting is, I guess that's how it would be, because I'm suggesting that 100K would go towards actually investigating whether that number is accurate in the first place.
Understand. All right. Anybody else wish to speak for this? Oh, sorry. Our property manager wishes to speak.
Between us, we're going to make a brief comment. In relation, there's an issue, I guess, around this one. It's I think, as Bryce said in the beginning, a little bit of a holding number in terms of the way it's been treated at the moment. But I guess it depends the extent to which it's a feasibility study as opposed to anything else. If it's a feasibility study that's not actually necessarily going to result in the construction of something, it becomes a question as to whether it's an operating expense that we need to make provision for. So that's, I guess, an element that's arisen there that Bryce was bringing to my attention.
All right, so it's a design, this is a design cost?
Well, it would be a $100,000 operating program, I guess, would be separate from the capital program that's currently there. Because technically, during a feasibility study, you don't actually know whether it will indeed result in anything, therefore you can't get it.
Okay, I'm now getting confused. So is this a feasibility study that you're seeking, Councillor Dingwell, or is it a...
I think for me it's more clarity around the cost of building an enviro hub in the future years.
So it's a scoping, is that what we're talking?
$100,000 has to be operating.
Has to be operating, okay. Okay, so it's an operating cost.
So, sorry, just one further comment. The brief that we're doing for the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan will explore the potential for the Enviro Hub to occur within that space. So there will be some element of feasibility and design that occurs as part of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Plan, but not to the level of detail that would be required to inform design and build.
Okay, all right, it gets murkier as we go. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak in favour of this? Yeah, we're going to have a break after this, I promise you. All right, is there anybody that wishes to speak against this? Okay, we will put it to the vote. The amendment. It's an operating program. And that is passed, 8 votes for and 5 against. All right, we will now take a 5-minute break. Well, to 10-minute break. Sorry, I'm getting wooed. To 4:20. We're getting near the end. Sort of. Let's get it. Yeah. Kia ora, everybody. Welcome back. We now will go to the next one, which is around, we're still in activity levels of service and budgets, working our way through. This is around that the following program be deferred until year 4 of the LTP. This is program 2044. It's curbside food waste collection and processing investigation. It's 271,000 of operational in years 2 and 3. Note that the corresponding capital program of 13.7 million was removed during the workshops. So, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Sorry, that additional comment wasn't meant to be added to the recommendation, but it was just a comment. So yes, that's correct. I think just the process of the workshops did have some unintended consequences sometimes where elected members pulled some things out and not other things out. And sometimes there were investigations or feasibility for things and then other corresponding capital programs that related to that. I guess I see this as something that would be nice to have, but I don't think it's affordable, and that's why elected members chose to take it out, the capital program, to take the capital program out of the draft. So I don't really see any value in spending 271,000 operational to do investigative work on something that we can't afford to do anyway. So that's why I'm proposing to remove that.
All right. Is there anybody else?
Sorry, I'm not proposing to remove it. I'm proposing to defer it to year 4 so that it can be considered during the next LTP process.
Okay. Currently it's in years 2 and 3. So is anybody else wishing to speak in favour of this? Councillor Barn.
I just wondered if it was possible to seek an officer's comment on whether this sits with the programme that was deferred or whether this is a separate thing, because it seems to me if it was with the programme that was deferred, it would make sense for it to be deferred.
Steve gave a comment in an email to us all yesterday on it.
Could perhaps we just get that repeated, Steve?
It's okay, I'm looking it up. Sorry, there were so many.
I'm not sure myself of the direct relationship between this and the, and I'm not sure who's the best to answer
I think
that.
Mike would be.
Yeah, Mike.
Mike's running down. Don't trip. Real carefully.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe there was a direct relationship with this and the capital programme. However, we can get back to you. You know, the curbside collection isn't the only option for food waste. As we know, food waste is a big component of our diverted target. But the collection and treatment of isn't the only solution. So the investigation was to look at that as well as other options. Yeah, that's a comment.
Thank you. All right. Do you want to speak any further to that, Councillor Barn, or are you just seeking some clarification?
No, thank you. Now, having received that clarification, I am now comfortable. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else wish to speak for this amendment? Okay, we get into the others. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My view is, and especially now hearing from the officer, is that actually this program is exactly where it needs to be. We need to do this work during this LTP cycle so that we actually know where we're going to go investment-wise in the next cycle. This has been something that's just gotten pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, despite community appetite for it, despite knowing that actually intercepting organic waste is one of the most important things we can do in our community to deliver on environmental sustainability. So I think it's absolutely where it needs to be, and I'd urge you to reject this and allow this investigation to go forward now, so that we'll be in a position in a couple of years' time to deliver properly on this for the community.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No, I just think this does need to go into, needs to be done now because we've got to reduce our volume of waste actually going into a landfill, so it just makes sense that it's actually in. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
I think this needs to stay in because fundamentally we are moving towards reducing carbon emissions, and as Councillor Barrett has mentioned, this is a big source of carbon, is waste food. I don't think that there's a problem in having the investigation and processing options separate to a capital programme to do the work. We may well find, as a result of the investigation, that we have something to put into the next long-term plan. So we did hear, I thought, very strongly from the community when we consulted on our waste minimisation plan about how they really wanted this. One of my main concerns about it has been how we would pay for it if we actually had it, because having another fixed amount onto the rates isn't very palatable to me. But nevertheless, I do support the investigation. We might get something innovative coming out of it. And I think it does support reduction in carbon, reduction in waste, and it feeds into what the community wants.
Right, back to you as right a reply, Councillor Naylor. Okay, cool. All right, we have it up there and we will vote on this. Thank you. And that has failed. 2 votes for and 11 against. Right, we now have still with activity levels, service and budgets, that the following programs are removed from the LTP and included on the considered but not included list. It includes programs 1838 and 2012, the upgrade of exotic aviaries of 834,000 and 601,000, being a total of 1.435 million, and then program 1273. Palmy Unleashed, which is 75,000, is also. Okay, and that's with you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. The first one, the programs for the exotic aviaries, my understanding of the historical decisions around that were that the renewal budget for replacing those was allocated towards building wild base, and on that basis, wild base proceeded. That at some point down the track, councillors must have made the decision to still retain this budget in there anyway. I think it is a bit of a double up, and I do wonder if there are options that could be explored for the exotic birds to be incorporated within the wild base. I'm assuming that would require some conversations, but I think with the facility that we've got there, it's an excellent facility. The budgets that have been associated with that have escalated to much more than what was originally anticipated, and I just am concerned that keeping both of these adds to ongoing renewals and operational costs in a way that's unaffordable. Do you want me to speak to both of these at the same time? There was actually 4.
Yeah, the other 2 are more related around streets for people. We'll treat those in the next.
Are we going to vote on both of these at the same time? They're quite different.
We don't have to. We can put them separate, but at this stage,
Okay, so I'd probably think it makes more sense to do them separately myself.
Okay, we can do them separate. I'm quite happy to do that.
What I had it's got there also, yeah, so any of these that if they are removed, I would have wanted them to be included on the considered but not included list, so that there is the opportunity that if the community really wanted to have those, I guess we would hear from them. So it's just making that transparent.
All right, anybody else wish to speak for this amendment? Okay, against, we'll go through. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So speaking to the exotic aviaries in particular, I'm not supporting this. Most of the work that's actually proposed through this long-term plan, we've talked about it being a prioritising exercise and investment long-term plan, is actually not super visible. A lot of it is actually around work that is underground, it's our infrastructure. And so there aren't a huge amount of, I guess, more shiny and exciting things in this long-term plan. And the aviaries are something that is a free activity for people across the city. It's something that is well loved. It's certainly something that if we propose to remove, we would hear a lot of feedback. And I'm not going to say that that's positive feedback. The suggestion that it could be incorporated into wild base, look, I'm not a bird expert. I'm not a wildlife expert. I'm not a vet. So I would also take guidance from somebody who does have those qualifications. But I'm going to say that my assumption is that exotic birds and recovering wildlife, injured wildlife, don't really mix well together. And that facility that was built wasn't actually built to accommodate both of those types of animals. So I'm not going to support removing a free activity in the city that is well loved, that is well appreciated, and also is something that is would not go down well with our community.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am none of those things also, but I feel like we're going to hear from one shortly. I think I have trouble here with the word upgrade in this context anyway, because my understanding of this project is actually we're talking about bringing those exotic aviaries up to a standard as required by the new bird welfare regulation. So I think upgrade is maybe a little incorrect here, and maybe part of the reasoning why this has come forward. And certainly from the perspective of the wild-based facility, that certainly can't include exotics. It's not, no, that's just not a thing. We have consulted on our exotic aviaries. We consulted on it as part of the wild base project itself, almost by accident, when the proposal was that we would get rid of them to do wild base, and heard very strongly from our community, and I have to say particularly from our disability community, that they wanted to keep those. It provides a very different experience, one that is not time-bound, that can be quite a reflective and quiet experience within the wider availability of the esplanade. And so I have some sympathy for the view that the price is quite large, and that may be something that officers will come back to us on when further work on this is done. But in terms of keeping that programme in, then absolutely I'm not voting to take it out.
Councillor Johnson.
I won't be supporting this. I think it is fair to say that initially when Wild Base was put forward, the plan was to get rid of the exotic aviaries. And that was the plan. But as Councillor Bowen has pointed out, we did hear from the community that they wanted to keep them. And I would also draw your attention to Manawatu District Council, who proposed removing their exotic aviaries, and they got an absolute waterfall of submissions of people complaining. So I think there's definite public support for keeping the exotic aviaries. The difficulty is that the aviaries were suffering from a significant amount of sort of delayed maintenance and had not been upgraded for many years. And in terms of their suitability for housing exotic birds, were not suitable. Now, they've had a lick of paint, but that still hasn't brought them up to current standards for housing exotic birds, and that's why this is needed. There's no way that you can mix the exotic birds in with the recovering wildlife because of disease transmission, as Deputy Mayor Rutherford alluded to. So I just think there might be places where money could be saved, but this isn't one of them. This is right in the middle of the Esplanade. It's our premier park. It has thousands and thousands of visitors every year. We want this to be a good look. I've certainly heard from Wildbase that the condition of the aviaries could be seen to be reflecting on Wildbase as well. And so there's some concern that if we're going to have a really good wildlife rehabilitation facility, we also need to have good quality and up to modern day standard accommodation for the exotic birds. So I won't be supporting taking this out.
Right, thank you, councillors. Back to you, Councillor Naylor, for right of reply. All right, we'll put this Avery's amendment to the vote. Thank you. That is failed, 2 votes for and 11 against. We'll now go back to program 1273, Palmy Unleashed, and that's around removing that from the LTP, but having it included on the considered but not included list. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. As with many programs that are introduced into our activities, they of course have some value, and as does this. But I think one of the problems that has caused the unsustainability of our budget is that everything that gets added in stays there forever and never gets taken out, but we keep adding more and more things into the budget. So I have pushed, as elected members will know, through the workshop process to ask for us to find a way of being able to evaluate a lot of the programs that are within MSL to actually have a mechanism to identify ones that perhaps have had their time and perhaps could be taken out, with the recognition that we're often starting new programs. So this is the rationale for that. Once again, if it is really valued by the community, I'm sure people would say if it is taken out but included on that list.
All right, are there any other councillors that wish to speak in favour of this amendment? Okay. In terms of against, I'll start. Look, councillors, I'll just remind you that this has already been chopped. It started at 150, so it's already been chopped in half already. I have a bit to do with this program in terms of people coming to us, our comms and marketing people, linking with them. It is a program which can be used to engage with other community groups and also other external funding. Just recently, while the New Zealand Stock Car Teams Champs were on, a little bit of this fund gets used for activating street activity, which we know self-proclaimed arts ambassador Sean Kay drives. But they are the sorts of things that happen with this program. That then attracts funding from the retail sector and other parties. So I'd be loath to think that we chop this vibrance. It's very small, but it is quite a key vibrancy program. It's already been chopped. So again, we'd just be killing it off totally. So I won't be supporting the amendment. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I also won't be supporting it. I mean, if we want a vibrant city and we want to keep our index up, which is what we've got to, we don't have many tools to keep our index up. This would be one of the tools that we've got. So to keep a vibrant city, we have to have something, and this is probably one of our only tools in our toolbox. So I definitely won't be supporting it.
Okay, no further speakers. Back to you, Councillor Naylor. No? Right, we'll vote, please. That has failed. 2 votes for and 11 against. Right, we now have, again, programs that be removed from the LTP and included on the considered but not included list. They're both streetscape programs. Program 1686, Streets for People program, 22.481 million, and program 1803, Village Streetscapes, of 1.9 million. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, happy for these two to be taken together. I recognise these are programs that have been well supported by elected members. However, I did want to bring this discussion into the chamber for the purposes of having the debate in public, because I guess I'm hearing from a lot of people that they consider that we're spending a lot of money to pretty up the square, is what I'm hearing. So I guess the concept that I wondered whether would have been a more prudent approach to this is waiting for the areas in the CBD to come up ready for renewal, and then to apply the design, because I think the design looks great, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anything bad about it, but whether we can afford to do all that, dig up perfectly good footpath and roads to make it look great when we actually have got an unaffordable budget, that's what I'm questioning. So I guess putting this into that list actually puts it out to the community to find out from them whether they think it's important enough for their rates to be spent on it, and I think if they do think that, we would hear from them. So it's more of a tester in my mind, is why I've put these up, to just, I don't think we've really consulted on this in a significant way recently, and I'd be interested to hear the community's views on whether they thought it was good value for their rates, money. I guess the other concern I had was that the original budget, I think 3 million for that first part, was now 5, and as with many of these progress, the budgets that we start with do escalate. So what is 22 million may well be, well in excess of that by the time we complete, if we did progress with all the programs.
All right. Are there any other councillors that wish to speak in favour of this amendment? There being none, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking in opposition to both of these program suggestions to be removed. We don't have to delete something to go out and ask our community what they think about it, or whether they think something is value for money. And in particular, I guess the comment around us spending money on making the square look pretty, actually that's really great that people are noticing the investment that we are putting in, because there has been a lot of work and a lot of planning gone into lifting the appearance, lifting the vibe of our CBD. So it's great that people are noticing, and let's continue that work. In regards to the second program there, and in particular that one, our villages have not had a lot of attention over the years. I hear on a regular basis that Ashurst is a forgotten area of the city, and obviously that one sits a little bit closer to home for me, but I am sure that elected members get that feedback across all of our villages. We certainly hear regularly from the Bunnythorpe community about investment that needs to happen for them, and this money has been a long time coming. It is money that through other long-term plans has been one of those easy ones to push back, and we are finally getting to the years where we actually are putting some investment in. So I would absolutely not support removing either of these, but actually I think that in particular for the village streetscape, that is just the beginning.
Thank you. I'll just add a comment too. I think the streetscape for the city is just it's a no-brainer. You can't have a donut. I challenge anybody to walk along the footpaths, especially a woman in high heels. Some of our footpaths do need replacing. They're not in great order. So, but the village streetscapes, they are often they feel forgotten, and they pay city rates. The 1.9 million is, again, over the long-term plan, is spread between Ashurst, Bunnythorpe and Longburn, and possibly parts of Linton. I mean, it isn't a huge amount of money, and it would be, I think, it'd be quite foolish to remove it. And the CBD streetscape program, we have started, and I think we need to finish. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't support this. Council needs to set direction in terms of what our city looks like. And I probably don't need to tell you, but failure to invest in our amenities will lead to urban decay. And these are community amenities, so therefore we need to go out to consultation with the community on it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, back to you. Okay, we'll put this to the vote, please. And that is lost, 2 votes for and 11 against. Right, still with activity levels and of service and budgets, that the 8.3% rates increase for the increase in renewal costs is adjusted to be spread across 4 years, increasing by 2.3% in the first year, 2% for the following 3 years. Prioritisation of programs to be determined by the CE based on safety and highest need. Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, the wording that I gave the officers this morning was changed, and this must have been from the email from yesterday, but I did update it. I can just verbally speak to what it was meant to be. I was still playing with numbers late last night, but what I had sent through was to be adjusted to be spread across 3 years, increasing by 3.3% in the first year, 3% in the second year, and 2% in the third year. So spreading it over 3 years, which I think reflected more what I recalled. We got agreement across councillors and during the workshop discussions a number of times, I think, to try and spread that cost, the 8.3 cost, to spread it over 3 years. So I was a little bit confused in the papers in the way that the numbers fell, and couldn't quite understand that. But I think spreading it, if there does need to be an 8.3% hit, I guess what I'm suggesting is it makes more sense for that to be spread over 3 years.
Okay, Councillor, have we got that correct for you? Okay. All right. Is there anybody else that would like to speak in favour of this? Okay. Now, anybody speak against this? Councillor Johnson.
I'm not supporting this because, if you recall, the advice from staff was not to spread this increase in renewal costs at all. The advice from staff was that we needed to do it all straight away. It was elected members that wanted to spread the cost over 3 years. And although initially we discussed spreading it evenly over the 3 years, when staff went away and looked at the programmes and decided what needed to be prioritised and what was urgent to be done versus what could be delayed, this was how it fell. It didn't fall that evenly. And there was also consideration of making sure that the rates increases over those 3 years were reasonably even as well. So I think even by spreading it over 3 years, we have to accept a degree of risk that we have taken on by pushing out some of these renewals for another couple of years. And the distribution of how we did it ultimately was suggested by staff based on their assessment of prioritisation. So for us to change it back again now, I think will be a little bit foolish. I think we've already, taken a degree of risk in delaying doing this as it is to try and reduce costs for people. And I wouldn't really want to be pushing more stuff into years 2 and 3 because we'll be risking failures. And we don't want to be that council. I don't want to be the council that's on the 6 o'clock news with a water main burst. Thanks very much.
I would have to agree, Councillor. I won't be supporting this. I think what we've got here, we've already done determining the priority around safety and highest need. We've already gone through that, and we do have to trust the advice of the engineers and those people that have put those things in front of us. I have some sympathy with how this has fallen and the intent of this, but we have started I believe we have to take the advice of our officers on this. So I won't be supporting the amendment. There are no other speakers, so back to you, Councillor, for
Yeah, I just will make a brief comment. Certainly respect the advice from staff, but I think that there is some value in considering the role of elected members in determining what they believe the community can afford and is willing to pay for. So I guess that's the tension that sometimes exists, and certainly if we'd followed the advice of staff on all items, we would be sitting here with a 23% rates increase. So I guess there is that tension, and I thought that we had come to quite a unanimous view as elected members on wanting to spread it over, so I'm happy to follow that through with this motion in the chamber.
All right, we'll put it to the vote, please. That has failed. 4 votes for and 9 against. Right, before we go to the first one, there's just been a government announcement that we will be going to level 1 at midnight here in the rest of New Zealand. Auckland will stay at level 2 at midnight.
Until when, do we know?
Reviewed next week.
Mr Mayor, through you, can I just correct a statement that was made by Councillor Naylor, which is actually incorrect?
Okay, fair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor said that if we took the advice of officers on everything, we'd be sitting here with a 23% rate increase. I want to make it very clear that at no stage did officers recommend a 23% rate increase.
Can I comment on that?
No, you've made the comment and you've got a reply. Okay, we move to the next one, and this is around making an amendment to the MSL budget. That city marketing budget from the MSL be reduced by $120,000 per year. Councillor Naylor, to you.
Thank you. The one of the papers that came to one of our workshops in the MSL paper options for trade-off included the option of one of the budget in terms of bringing to light what some of the operational budgets contained. We were made aware that there was $233,000 that was investing in city marketing specifically related to project and identity campaign work. I guess that over the period in which that identity work was rolled out, I did reflect on that and recognised that that was an item that was really driven by staff without any direction or input from councillors. And I think there is value in programs being tested and consulted on such as that. So I guess I appreciated that being made, that information being made available, and I guess that was one of the items in that paper that I identified as perhaps being one that could be reduced and perhaps not spent quite as much on. So that's operational, 233,000 operational, so the suggestion is to reduce it by 120,000 per year, which would be 1.2 million over the course of the LTP.
Okay, are there any other councillors that wish to speak in favour of this amendment? Okay, anybody against? All right, we're going to put it to the vote. Thank you. and that has failed. 2 votes for, 10 against. All right, we'll take the others points, which are the infrastructure strategy.
We need to move this one first now.
Oh, okay, sorry, yep. The substantive part of this, which is moving the activity levels of service and budgets. We'll get that up.
So are we at the end of the amendments then?
Yes, we've just got one for that section. We've got one more section to come. Okay, so that this is around C, the activity levels of service and budgets be approved, and I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'm not going to speak to it, and I'll ask you to vote, please. That has passed 11 votes for, 1 against. We'll now move to a catch-all of the others, which is around infrastructure strategy, revenue and financing policy, asset management plan, executive summaries, the 2021 development contributions policy, significant forecasting assumptions, forecast financial statements and rating information. Just need a minute to do that. We've even beaten the media. Make sure it's a good headline. Last one wasn't. Yeah. Okay, we've got this in front of us. I'm not going to read them all out again, just the addition of the late item, which is the long-term plan disclosure statement. I look to move them, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'm not going to make any further comments to them. I'll open it up for anybody else. There being none, we will vote, please. Has passed 12 votes for and none against. Right, I just need to extend the meeting past 5 p.m. to 5:30. Hopefully get out here a bit quicker than that. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Extend meeting to 5:30. All right, councillors, if I could ask you to vote, please. Okay, we're just going to do a vote by hands, sorry. All those in favour? It's unanimous, thank you. All right, we got through that little hiccup, legislative-wise. All right, councillors, we're going to move to number 3, that the consultation document for the 2021 10-year plan be approved subject to audit, but we have an amendment from Councillor Naylor. We'll just get it typed up. Do you want to speak to that, councillor?
Yeah, just briefly, the document, as I perhaps highlighted through my questions earlier in the day, the content refers the lack of compliance with the LGFA rules, refers this to an individual program being nature calls rather than referring it to the overall capital expenditure. And when we've got $1.4 billion capital expenditure, I think it would be more accurate to relate those comments to the overall expenditure rather than identifying one program and saying that that was the reason. So I'm just, basically I'd be happy, I guess just briefly, there's a few other comments. I mean, I do think this is really wordy document. I didn't think it was, I think the from recollection, you know, I don't know who's going to, it doesn't capture your, it doesn't grab you and hold you there. It's very rambly. I'm sorry, no offence to whoever's written it, but I do think it could be more concise. I don't know if there's an opportunity for that to be worked on as well, but that's just a comment on the side. But the main thing I did want to seek an amendment for was to get a little bit more objective in terms of that language, so that when it's talking about us not meeting the LGFA rules, that's not, it doesn't then say because of nature calls or that we can't afford nature calls, because we could equally say that that's because of other capital expenditure that we are committing to.
All right, we'll just get it up.
It would also be good to know who the target audience is for this, because we've got the summary if we're going to have a summary document and this and the large supporting information, I'm sort of wondering what this is, the purpose of this document is.
This is a legal compliance document.
Just bear with us, we're just trying to get it written up. Oh, here we go. All right, so it's that the content of the consultation document has changed so that the lack of compliance with the LGFA rules refers to the overall capital cost rather than a specific program. So are there anybody else in support that wants to speak in support of this? Okay, all right. Against, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am against this. The key reason why the Nature Calls project is in there is because it is over 25% of the budget, and it's a mandatory project which we can't change. So I'm comfortable. The rest of the projects are all piecemeal, so if you're going to put one in, I'm comfortable as it is. It's not a big deal anyway.
Councillor Johnson.
I don't support changing it. In fact, I think it's a good idea that we single it out, because we don't know yet whether that cost that we've got in is going to be anywhere near the right cost. And it could be double that, as we all know. And so I think it's important that we do signal that that is the single biggest cost that we're facing, and that without that and the other water asset work, we would be within the requirements. So I don't support it on those grounds, but I also don't support it because it seems to me to be a little bit of sort of politicking, really, instead of just leaving staff to write the document, sort of talking about how we phrase something to basically support an agenda that the capital spend is too big, which, as we all know, is some people's opinion. And we don't get to rewrite the document so that it supports our political views.
Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do have some sympathy for this because in questioning that I raised about why certain examples have been given, the officer explained that they were basically illustrative. There was no real rationale behind them. But in this sense, in this example, I think there is a rationale here. The sympathy I have is that I think what we've heard through questioning today is that Nature Calls might be the single biggest project and cover a large amount of the shortfall, but my understanding was it doesn't cover all of it. So it's not strictly true to say that X equals Y. And so I do have some sympathy for what's being asked here, but I think that can probably be dealt with as a minor amendment in tweaking. I don't want to take out the Nature Calls reference.
Right, we've done our 1 and 3, so I'll then go back to you for right of reply.
To me, this isn't about politicking, this is about being as honest as we can with our community about the reasons that our budget is unaffordable and unsustainable. And I think, as the officers clarified at the beginning, that is the cumulative effect of all of the spending, not just one item. So I think it's more honest. I think it's easy for us to blame one item when actually, even if you take that item out, our increases are really significantly higher than what they've been in the past, and in a way that I think would still, I mean, if you look at our rates increases for the next 3 years, which is 23% over the next 3 years, that's before wastewater even kicks in. So we've got really high increases, and I think it's easy for elected members to blame Nature Calls when actually there's a whole lot of other reasons that are driving that as well. So I think it's more honest to the community to acknowledge the broader reasons for that rather than just blaming it on one item.
All right, we'll give the voting a go because there's been a few little IT hiccups, so we'll try to get this, otherwise we'll go to a show of hands. So could you vote, please? And has failed, 3 votes for, 8 against. Right. We now go back to the substantive. That the consultation document for 2021 10-year plan be approved subject to audit. I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Is there any discussion? Yep, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just confirming that the opportunity exists for minor amendments to be forwarded through to you, and that opportunity exists. Thanks.
Yep, we're going to get to that. So, no further comments. We will vote. It has passed 10 votes for, 1 against. We now come to number 4, which the committee notes the financial policies supporting material in the 2021 consultation document, amended if necessary following the audit process, will be presented to Council for adoption and subsequent consultation. And number 5, we can probably take these together, that the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Chair of Finance and Audit be given delegated authority to make minor corrections to the documents before they're provided to Audit New Zealand. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was raised in questions earlier, but I just wanted to follow the concern around the summary document that's going to be available to the public, which is we haven't seen yet, but I understand that you'll get a chance to sign that off as Mayor. But I know that the timelines of our formal meeting processes might not allow for it, but I wondered if that could still be circulated and for members to be able to still give some feedback through to you as Mayor. It's not usual that we have a consultation document that we don't get to see in my memory for it.
The summary document, yeah, I'm sure we can get that circulated. I think the officers did make a comment around it's like part of the wider gambit of items that go out, whether it be social media posts, radio ads. This is one that go, but it is quite important because it goes to the householders. So yes, we can get that circulated and you can feed comments in.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just note that the recommendation 5 is to make minor corrections, and our normal resolution is really around, I guess, minor amendments or something of the like, because corrections would indicate that actually if something was factually incorrect in the document, whereas the point of that resolution is really around if a heading needs to be amended or the order of things needs to be rejigged a little bit, and so
changing the word corrections
to amendment. So I can either move an amendment, or if you're happy to
happy to change that.
address that.
Minor edit, it should be.
Minor edits, yeah.
Minor edits, sorry.
Something to catch that could be just.
Minor amendments is fine. Leave it at that.
Thank you.
Okay. No further comments. We'll vote. It's passed, 11 votes for and none against. Now we go to number 6, which is on page 13. No, is that it? That's it? Oh, it's going to do it all again. No, only kidding. All right, I'll now declare the meeting closed. We are done. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to the CE and the staff and anybody else that's hung around. Media's gone.